You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you. It is Friday, January 17th, game day morning for Indiana men's basketball as they travel this evening to Ohio State, take on the Buckeyes. What?
The Ohio. Sorry.
I'm not doing that with these people at this point. Sorry. Yeah.
Let's restart. I hate that I did that. Newton, start over.
Nope. We can't restart. We got to just keep going through. This is what happens when you record on video. So, but no, here we are, Indiana at 13-5 and 4-3 on the season in the conference. And certainly, Scott, the last time we talked, which was Sunday, we were very curious to see what was going to be happening with Indiana this week. And boy, did we find some stuff out on Tuesday night as Indiana loses by 25 points at home to Illinois in a game that wasn't that close. So we're going to talk about that. I was there. You were not. And we're going to talk about the stuff that's happened since then.
So is that me winning?
Yeah. I mean, someone made a good choice about not going to that game. I
went to the Pacers game. It was a little bit better, but
for many reasons, I wish I had also not gone to that game. But anyway, that's another story. So we're talking about that. But first, just a reminder, we're brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, and a continued rolling out of new things that are worth purchasing. Go to the Home Field front and go type in that code HOME23, get 15% off your first order, and let them know that we sent you. Go follow their social media as well. They do an awesome job with that.
I got an email from the IU bookstore that's like, we're bringing the Bison back. I'm like, oh, you guys stepping on Home Field's turf. And then I look at their stuff and it's like, it's Home Field stuff.
Home Field stuff. That's right.
So they're but again, go through their website, use the promo code, but it's like they no one can do the Bison like they can.
Home Field bringing the Bison to the Union. The Union just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Also, a reminder, we're on Substack, crimsoncast.substack.com. It's free to sign up, get podcasts delivered right to your inbox, and occasionally we have a VIP video. I was going to record one last night about this basketball situation. I actually recorded a couple. I didn't like how either of them came across, and so I didn't release them. So VIPs know in spirit I put out a VIP episode, but I didn't actually. I'm sure that's going to resonate very well with you. But we'll have a little something that's attached to this one. So after you're done watching or listening to the end one, if you're a subscriber, which you can do for a nominal fee, $5 a month, $50 a year, help support the podcast. We'll have a little extra message for you here at the end. So just scroll down in your email and you'll find that there. You can also find all of the Crimson Cast podcasts as well as the rest of the Back Home Network podcasts on the Back Home Network YouTube channel. Please subscribe. We hit a big mark this week, Scott. We are over 7,000 subscribers now on the Back Home Network YouTube channel, and we are so thrilled to have all you folks watching along with us. It really is great to have you in the audience. So we're looking forward to continuing to get those numbers up, continuing to do more video-based items. And
let me Google, am I an influencer?
You're not. No. Sorry. I'm sorry,
Damn.
Scott. Someday,
You start doing the dancing.
You do. Yeah. Get the whole family involved. Like that definitely seems like I'm actually shocked you guys don't do like choreographed family dances, get waffles involved, when you're doing wine trivia night or stuff.
We did trivia night last night. There was no dancing, but we did pretty well. The four young boys of the neighborhood all had a team. They named themselves the Quizzlers, and it was great because like they were just missing stuff left and right. And then one of the questions was like, James Bonderman or whatever, like, is better known by his YouTube name. And they're all like, ah! It's like Mr. Beast. It's like, they're like, we know it. And they ran up there.
It's amazing. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive into things. Indiana losing 94-69 to Illinois on Tuesday. And boy, it really wasn't even that close. Indiana allows 60 points at home in the first half. En route to, I think, what was the widest margin of victory that they'd had in regulation at Assembly Hall, or maybe the most points an opponent had scored at Assembly Hall. We were in the stands trying to figure out, like, what is the record for most points scored against IU in Assembly Hall, which I had honestly forgotten what that might have been. And, of course, I think Iowa was involved somehow. But, it was bad. And I think what was worse about it for Indiana in this game was not just the loss, but how completely disconnected Indiana as a basketball team looked from any level of competitiveness. And, this was an Illinois team that had just lost at home to the same USC team that Indiana beat at home last week. And a lot of people looked at that and said, wow, Indiana might actually be really good. They've won 5 games in a row, and they beat this USC team that was able to go into Champaign and beat a top 15 Illinois team. Surely that's a sign that Indiana is actually of quality as an opponent, and that was proven to be not true, both in the Iowa game that happened over the weekend and also this one. Scott, there's really not that much to break down during, about the game itself. It was one of those games where Illinois did whatever they wanted offensively. It wasn't even a situation where there was something outlandish going on, like, Illinois hitting like 23s and a half or something like that. Like, it was just an old-fashioned butt kicking by the Illini. And, Indiana showed a little bit of fight in the second half. Mike Petrie, longtime Crimson Cast contributor, noted over text that was almost insulting to see as an IU fan. It's like, well, now coming out of halftime down 30, now you're going to show some fight. But it was an unfortunate set of circumstances all the way around. And it ended ugly with Omar Ballo getting into a fracas. And, it was just one of those things where kind of everything went wrong. And you got to talk about the boos. You got boos coming down from the stands as the team's coming off the floor. There was a Fire Mike Woodson chant, which I didn't hear, but I take on faith that was indeed what occurred, because several people noted it. And it was just one of those ugly scenes. Not as ugly as it could have been, but still pretty ugly. I think the crowd was more shell-shocked for most of the first half than angry. And then most people started drifting out, starting at halftime and leading into about the 8-minute mark of the second half during that period. So is it the end of the season from there are still games to be played and there's still a chance to do something in the tournament? Of course not. There's still games to be played. Indiana's still technically above 500, but that felt like an absolute turning point in the narrative of this season and the way that the relationship between IU basketball and its fans, for this season at least, was going to play out.
I think you hit a lot of stuff right on the head. I was at the Pacers game, and I was going to come home and watch the IU Illinois game, and then I saw a notification. I should have just swiped it, but it just caught my eye. It's like Indiana fans leaving at halftime, fans chanting "Boo Woodson." I'm like, what is going on? Like, what? I text you. I'm like, what is going? Like, I just want to know what the hell is happening. And then I couldn't turn away from kind of digging into it.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned what it was like there. Here's everything you laid out. True. Here's what I've been thinking about that I haven't really heard talked about is that, you can discuss whether you should, boo players or not. You can discuss whether people should be chanting this or not. But here's the thing, is like, it happened. And once that Rubicon is passed, so to speak, you don't come back from that, or you have to really change something. This is something I've talked about for years. And this has been a problem with IU basketball for years, is you do the status quo or you do slightly worse than expectations. The idea of just coming back and then just meeting expectations isn't enough. You then have to go above expectations at some point. If you're a C student and you get a D minus, a D minus, a D minus, you can't just get a C and then say, hey, we're all good. It's like, no, you need to get an A plus. IU football was a prime example of that in all the respects. For years, they were just barely trying to get by and then not meeting expectations. And it's like, you have to do something out of the ordinary to really wake people up. They did that this year. Like, that was way out of the ordinary. That was not just a 6-win season. That was insane. What I'm concerned about, Galen, is this, is, you're on January 17th. You have a lot of home games left. And once you've kind of broken this seal, it doesn't get put back. And you can talk about whether it's right, whether it's wrong, but it's like, it's happening. And even if you just, you lose at Ohio State, you win at Northwestern, that's not good enough. Like, that's not good enough for people to not be pissed. And I will also say this, unfortunately, a lot of this anger and angst is based on years and years of not meeting expectations. That goes before Woodson. That goes before Archie. I mean, there's a lot of pent up baggage that's being pushed up here that has to be like dealt with. And you can't just say, hey, we won at Northwestern. Like, we're all good. Let's bring it back and let's cheer for the team. Like, this is what I'm most concerned about, is this could degenerate to a point where we look back at the crowd reaction in this game and be like, man, that was nice when we were just chanting and booing. You know, there's still, as I view it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 home games.
Yeah.
And some of them, I mean, you play at Purdue, at Wisconsin, and then you're home to Michigan, at Michigan State, home to UCLA. You could be on a 5-game losing streak, 4 of them being ass kickings going into that UCLA game. How are the fans going to be there? And that's what I'm most concerned about. Is everybody has a right to be angry or angsty, I should say. I'll change my word, angsty. But I'm just worried that and again, I'm not calling for anything, but like if just nothing is done, if we just continue to do the same thing, this is going to degenerate and get very, very ugly. I mean, it's funny. Then I'll stop talking. Like, we talked about this at the end of the Archie era, like when they started booing the team, but that was at Conseco or Banker's Life. Like, that was the end of the season. It's like, man, this could get ugly for the last 2 games. This could get really ugly for like 2.5 months with 6 or 7 different games. There's really nothing you can do, but it's like, you can't just do nothing. And I don't think, it's like, you can't just go and like beat Northwestern and be like, all right, well, we've fixed everything. Like, you have crossed a level where you have to do something really out of the ordinary. And I'm just not sure this team's able to do it. I don't know what the answers are. And that's what I'm most concerned about, is this just getting really kind of ugly and frustrating for 2.5 months.
No, you're right. And it's a weird setup. And I think you hit a bunch of interesting points. Indiana's in some ways lucky that 4 out of their next 5 games are on the road.
Yes.
You're at Ohio State tonight. If you're listening to this on Friday, you're at Northwestern on Wednesday. You've gotten Maryland in a noon home game. That's on a Sunday. That's going to be a great one. That's really set up to be positive. I think you got to go to Purdue the following Friday, and then you've got to go to Wisconsin, which of course is where Indiana plays really well historically.
Right. One of the many places now that we've added to the list of that we play well. Yeah.
And then you're back, and you've got favorite son Dusty May, who's coaching Michigan, bringing the Wolverines into Bloomington on a Saturday. It doesn't set up well for this particular circumstance. And I think you bring up probably the key point, which is that it's one thing for this kind of thing to occur. And we've unfortunately been here on a variety of occasions. I mean, I'll go back to Davis's last year. People forget, many of you are too young to even remember that, but you remember, they lose that game to Connecticut. They go on the road. They get destroyed by Wisconsin. They come back, and you have that infamous Iowa game at home where Davis doesn't show up to work.
Right.
He's allegedly ill. And fortunately, Davis didn't coach another game in Assembly Hall under a cloud, because it was right after that Penn State game that happened in the middle of the week that they had the press conference saying that he was going to be leaving his position at the end of the year. Crean's last year, that fell well apart. Like, you had the what was it, the Josh Newkirk 3 overtime like layup game against Penn State, and then they went on a run where they lost their next 5, including home games against Purdue and Michigan. And you could just feel like things were coming to a rapid close there. You had a similar thing with the Archie thing. And the Archie thing was weird because you're still in COVID restrictions, and I think everybody's a little bit awkward about things. But as you mentioned, that situation at Banker's Life Fieldhouse was not good, and IU was like, we got to take action. This one is like specific or especially bobothersome for a couple of reasons. One,
it's happened earlier than any of those. Sorry to interrupt, but like earlier than any of those.
Absolutely. I think the best case scenario for IU from a program perspective or from an athletic department perspective was that IU was going to hold it together, get through January, remain competitive, and then do their normal fall apart in February thing. And then there would be a natural finish maybe if things hadn't worked out. And I think the 5-game winning streak kind of gave everybody hope that maybe things would be all right for a little bit. But 2 25-point losses in a row, and it's not just that. as you mentioned, it's the backdrop of last year and not just the disappointment, but the adversarial relationship that got created. And I'm not saying one side or the other was right or wrong, but the fans in Woodson, there was clearly a break there. And for all but the most diehard fans or the people who feel like, Indiana's at fault all the time for everything as opposed to the coaches, people were very much in you'll have to show me that you can do X, Y, or Z approach with Woodson. And what we've seen now is like Indiana's played 5 top 50 KenPom opponents. Sorry, they played 6 of them. They've lost 5 of those games. And the only one that they won was the game versus Penn State. So you've got a situation now where Indiana's demonstrated that they're not competitive against better competition. And we
have nothing but better competition ahead.
It was essentially, yes. And you've also got the unfortunate scenario where there really is not much of an emotional connection between the fan base and the coach, between the fan base and the team. And it's a product of, there's not a lot of recruiting that's gone on here. It's a bunch of pieces that got brought in from elsewhere. And I think a lot of IU fans view that as being a huge part of the problem. And again, they look back at Woodson and the lack of recruiting that's come out of the coaching staff, particularly at the guard position over the last few years. And they say, this is the core of the issue. And so I really, I know this, like I know IU athletics, any athletic department, not just IU, but certainly IU. It's one thing for coaches to get yelled at or for people to say awful things on social media. I'm not condoning it, but it happens. And I've engaged in it myself in the past, and I regret doing that. It's another when it starts to spill over onto players. And I know that that's one of the last things you want to see as an athletic department. You don't ever want to see your fans pitting off against your players or media members going after players getting into the fray and punching back in social media. We saw that a little bit this week. This was a really dumb week from a social media perspective when it came to IU basketball. We've had many dumb weeks. This was maybe the dumbest so far. And you can point the fingers and you can blame people for things, but at the end of it, it's a situation that has to be addressed. And I guess what concerns me is that I don't know what happens here. Like, I don't know that there's the political will within the athletic department or the university to fire Mike Woodson. And when I say political will, what I mean by that is not like politics, like Republican versus Democrat, but like hiring the men's basketball coach in Indiana is probably the most important and fraught process that you go through as an administrator. There's a lot of people with a lot of skin in the game. We know that Mike Woodson has a lot of people who view him as part of the IU basketball family because of having played here. We know there's a lot of people that are trying to protect Mike Woodson from the circumstances in the situation. We also know, though, that there's a lot of basketball left to be played this season. You've got 2 full months of games from this point forward. You've got, as you mentioned, 6 of those games at home. You've got an increasingly toxic situation. You also have a coach who, whether or not he should be thinking this way, this does not appear to be a coach that is inclined to think that he's doing anything so wrong that it should result in him resigning from his role.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he should feel that way, but one of the things that sometimes you'll see, and we actually saw it with Mike Davis in 2006, was the coach saying, all right, I'm going to step away from this because it's not working. I don't sense that with Woodson. I didn't sense that in the post-game comments. We've seen very little follow-up from that Illinois game in terms of how that got addressed. And it just feels like all of these pieces have come together and could lead to a very, very ugly couple of months because fans at this point feel disregarded. Fans at this point feel like the basketball program that they shell out huge amounts of money to go see and to travel, has basically been allowed to operate as the, without a lot of oversight and without a lot of particular care. Like, okay, it's Mike Woodson's ship. He can steer it. And it's clearly been steered in a direction that isn't leading to a lot of success. And so you have this pent-up reservoir of a lot of really angry people who are increasingly getting angrier because what they're seeing that going out on the floor regularly looks inadequate for what they were promised, especially with this season. And so I'm really disturbed by where this could end up, because it's just going to make everybody look bad. And I don't see at this stage a particularly easy resolution playing out for anybody. And that's a real shame.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a couple of things, it for those on the outside, of which I'm assuming anybody listening to this is a big IU fan, but you're talking to somebody who's on the outside. It's like you have to put into context what happened at last year's senior day. Like that was just for a lot of people, that was jarring, because we're a program that obviously had ties with Bob Knight. That was not the best exit, and that created some tensions within the IU fan base. The idea of bringing a former player back was always kind of discussed, and should we do it? And so this is the first time we had done it. And then just within 36 months, that same person is basically like making a Magino line. Like, here's the line of where fans are and aren't, versus just I love everybody. You have the other thing that I think is also concerning for me.
I don't know. I'm not sure if the Magino line is the
wrong reference
metaphor there.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. Okay. I'm looking forward to our listeners breaking that one down from a psychological perspective. Anyway, go ahead.
It's awful. I was actually a history major at IU, so maybe it's not showing my great major. I'm just a line. It's a dividing line. The dividing line. We'll use that.
Sorry, go ahead.
All I know is that we have true Crimson Cast fans and we don't. And those who are against the Magino line. No. The other thing that, this is where I've kind of been saying this also, where you're in a tough spot if you're Woodson, or just the way this team has been run, is, outside, even before last night, I was looking ahead. Like, I don't know what to look forward to, because this team has been, up until the last 2 days, like still kind of relatively disappointing. Hadn't shown well in Atlantis. It's like the team doesn't recruit. Like there's not an effort to recruit the Midwest, Indiana, or kind of recruit at all. And as I've said before, last 2 years, they've done pretty well in the transfer portal. So the idea of like going into the next season, like we're just going to do better. Like, I don't know if there is better. Like, I don't know what the solution would have been this offseason anyway. This is always a problem, in the pros, you can be like, well, we'll just tank and get better draft picks. Like, there is no option here. But yeah, I mean, and this is where I think you hit it perfectly. Like, fans, and I will put myself in there, we feel disregarded, because it's kind of like there's this discussion of like, you guys have to follow us like blind faith.
Well,
and
yeah, no,
and the idea of like,
I think you're I think you're right. And this is part of the problem, is there was a real attitude. Some of it came out directly. A lot of it was indirect. That's like, I know what I'm doing and other people don't. And this is how this team's going to be built, and this is how it's going to work. And whether it's the overt statements, whether it's just the demonstration of, well, we're not going to bother. I mean, I don't think that they're not putting effort into recruiting is accurate. They're not putting enough effort into recruiting. They're not putting enough. Like, it's clearly not working. It's clearly not connecting. And this was clearly a bad approach from a team building perspective. And I think what's frustrating for a lot of IU fans is they knew that ahead of time. They could see that was going to be a problem. There was people all throughout the summer who were like, I'm not entirely certain that you can go in full transfer portal and actually put together a competitive team. And you have people, especially on social media, who went out of their way to attack those people who were expressing questions. Like, well, you people don't know ball. You people don't know what you're talking about. The coaching staff knows what they're doing. 3-pointers aren't that important. Like, just whole list of things where it's like, am I being gaslit? Like, what the hell? What is this? Like, what? Like, why is it that a reasonably intelligent group of people, when they highlight things that are going wrong with the program, and when you can point to examples like Connecticut, like Auburn, like Louisville this year, like
we're beating you,
special case, but it's like, whether it's the program building process that we've seen out of UConn, where they've mixed really intelligently recruits and transfer portal, whether it's Auburn and what they've done, whether it's Louisville going out and like demonstrating that you don't need 4 years to get all of your people in, that you can put together a pretty decent team if you have a good plan. And then you go back to the offense and all of the talk that we heard about, oh, things are going to change, things are different, this or that. You go back and you look at the numbers, and we talked about this last time, Scott. Indiana's back to 331st in the country in 3-point attempt ratio, which is, terrible.
4 in the last 2 games each.
They're shooting worse from 3 percentage-wise this year than last year. There's so many little things statistically where it's like this is essentially a slightly better carbon copy of last year. You're about 30 points better in both offense and defense in KenPom, but you're still essentially the 60th placed team in the country, not the 30th placed team, which to me was the bare minimum of expectations. And so, you take all of that and you combine it with what has been just kind of a standoffish approach that's grown between the coach and the fan base and the program and the fan base.
I mean, I know it's one thing, but like blowing off Fisher for the post game, it's like, dude, just go talk to Fisher. Like Fisher's not going to ask hard-hitting questions. Like he's just going to say, man, tough game. And you can say what you want and then you're done. Like it's even just little things like that for me, I know it's one tiny little thing. It's like, that pisses me off. It just does. It's like, do your job. Like you lost, you got your butt kicked. Like as coach, part of your job is to answer questions. And part of it is to answer them to Don Fisher, who's, by the way, like an institution. He's been there 50 years. He's going to ask you 2 very softball questions. You get over it and you move on. Like the fact that you can't even do that after you lost, and it's like, that's a tough night. That's your job.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of it all, I think the thing that bothers a lot of people is it just doesn't feel like there's a ton of accountability being taken by the coach. Every time legitimate questions get asked about why the team underperforms in these games or why they play poorly against worse teams, it's always, well, I got to get the guys over the hump. And that's it. That's like the extent of what you'll get in terms of tangible answers, which just makes it seem like, okay, I'm going to say these nothing words that placate people, and then we're just going to move on. And okay, you can do that, but then what ends up being the exemplar of your work is what happens on the floor.
Right. Well, then it all just comes down to wins and losses. Like that's the same thing. When you spend all offseason kind of fighting everybody on all of these things, like you were saying, then it's like, okay, like then now there's no connection to like the play. It just show me in Atlantis.
Yeah.
Like, and that's because you built this system where you're fighting everybody. And it's like the only thing that we can now discuss are the wins and losses. And so we went to Atlantis and we got our ass kicked twice.
Yeah.
And it's like, now what do you want to say? Like now, how is it not my fault? And like, again, a win against Winthrop does not make up for 2 of those beatings. And even the next week, you win at, Ohio State, or you win at Northwestern. Again, not good enough. Like you're at a point now, you want to turn this around, go win 9 in a row. That sounds crazy. Like, yes, you need to do something completely out of the norm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
that's not a fair something to ask of the team that we see on the court right now.
Yeah. No, that's essentially the answer. I mean, we've talked about projections for this team. And when we talked about this over the weekend, it was really like, well, they'll probably be able to beat Washington. They may be able to beat Northwestern. And then you got a bunch of teams that just according to the statistical profile, Indiana's going to struggle to beat. And it's hard to argue that at this point. And, the biggest red flag to me with that Illinois game was just how little competitive fire the team showed, how little the defense was very bad. I mean, again, we focus on the offense, but the defense continues to be disappointing. And it just felt like Illinois had their way with whatever they wanted in that game, despite at the end of it not having that great of a statistical profile, all things considered, other than the fact that they just abused Indiana on the offensive glass. They had 16 offensive rebounds in that game. So I look at it and I say to myself, when we get past the fights over who should be like where the program's going and whether or not Indiana is it the program's fault? I keep coming back to this. Like every time a coach does badly at Indiana, there's a bunch of people who, for whatever reason, point the finger at Indiana. It must be Indiana's fault. And it must be the program must just not be a good program anymore. and that's still happening now. And I still see, like, I don't know why. I don't know what the defense for Woodson is at this point. Like, this is his team. It's his players. He went out and handpicked the players that are playing out there right now. It's his system, which a lot of people have said this is not a great system to run in college, but he's decided he's going to run, at least now in 2025. But that's what he's running. This is him. And when you've got the example again of Curt Cignetti coming in and making a huge change in a short period of time, like, everybody would have said, well, IU as a program, that's not possible in football. And yet you make the right hire, you give them a structure to do things in, and it ends up working out. You mentioned Louisville, and Louisville's had a little bit of an inconsistent season, but they're clearly better than they were last year. They're on a 7 or 8 game winning streak, 7-game winning streak, 8 of their last 9. They've won on the road at Pitt. They beat Clemson. That team had to start from scratch. Almost always, it's the coach's fault when things aren't going well, because the coach has such an immense amount of control over what's going on. And that's where, when I look at this result, the result against Iowa, the lack of fire, the lack of effort, it's not just the system. It's not just the players. There just doesn't appear to be a real coherent sense of identity. That's really what you have to have as a coach. Like, if you're going to build a program, and if you're going to talk about winning Big Ten titles and winning national titles, which Woodson went out of his way to say on Hoosier Hysteria, well, that doesn't come from having good players. It comes from having a great culture. And I think if there's one big thing that I would point at and say this is why the Woodson era is failing, or has failed, I mean, and maybe it's failed at this point for good, it's his inability to build a culture that was able to survive the exit of Trace Jackson Davis, because Trace Jackson Davis, seemed to have some kind, I don't know how much he was involved in it or whatever, but you can't look at the results and the way that the team played in the first 2 seasons, and they weren't great that first season that Woodson was here, but they had a defensive identity. There seemed to be some level of pride. It's hard to reconcile that and the year after with what we've seen the last season and a half. And when you look at that Illinois game and getting blown out by 25 at home, look, Indiana's gotten blown out at home before. It's not the first time. I've sat through several blowouts at IU, but that one felt different because that first half just felt like a capitulation. It felt like we don't care enough to try. And as much as you want to point the finger at players on that, ultimately coaches get paid huge amounts of money in this business because they get credit when teams do play hard. Like, when we look at all the Auburns and the Alabamas and the UConns and all of these teams, and the way that those teams are able to play with a sense of pride. Iowa State's another one. Like, why is Iowa State doing so well? That's a team with no natural recruiting advantages, but they have a coherent identity and they've plugged players into it. Mike Woodson chose to go grab players without having a coherent identity to plug them into. And I believe going into every season, we're going to give it a chance to play out. We're going to see how it works. What we've seen out there the last 2 games just doesn't warrant that. I don't know what argument you could make to say, well, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It feels like the light at the end of the tunnel right now is a train.
Yeah. Well, and the blowout against Illinois, it's in context of just getting blown out by Iowa. Like, that's the thing too, is like, it's not just teams can get blown out, but having back-to-back blowouts, like coming out and looking lethargic after you did it 4 days before, is tough. When you look ahead, I don't really want to get into like what do we do, like what decisions need to be made. But the thing that's rattling around in my mind that I would always say the last job that I had was, I would say this to my manager, is like, because he was very indecisive at times. And I would say, not making a decision is a decision, and it has its own consequences. Like, you just like, we'd be picking between 3 different marketing strategies. And it's like, he just like, he wouldn't make a decision. And I'm like, you're picking the 4th door. Like, just not making a decision is making a decision. And that's what I wonder about here is if, and again, I don't know, there's things you could do, but just not doing anything is like, I hope that they understand that is also a decision that has its own repercussions and ramifications. And I'm not as concerned about like basketball apathy, because at the end of the season, getting a new coach is the NBA equivalent of, tanking. Like, that suddenly everything gets refreshed and renewed, and like, people will come back. you're almost at a point now where like you want fan apathy. Like you just want people to check out because you don't want them to come in for 6 games booing and, calling for firings and doing that. Like it's going to get really ugly. And I do think, I mean, a lot of my friends and people that we know, like they're just checked out. Like they are already checked out. And I can see, poor crowds. And in a way, to me, that's probably the best outcome for here is everyone just checks out and we check back in the end of March. But I just, that's the thing in my head is that, if you're IU, there's no good decisions here, but not doing anything and just hoping that you can win a bunch of games. Like that's a decision that does have its own, repercussions. And maybe that's the best decision here is to do nothing until the end of the season.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking about that. You do, I think you're right. You do almost hope that people get apathetic. You hope that people just stop paying attention. But again, it's Indiana. You're not going to get that to happen. People are very passionate about this program, and I'm frankly tired of that being held against the fans.
I agree.
I'm frankly tired of, and it's not. I'm not saying the athletic department holds it against the fans, but I do think a lot of self-proclaimed thought leaders on social media hold the passion of the fan base against them. Fans are generally inarticulate about how to express this because they expect to go spend a lot of money on tickets, go sit in the stands and cheer, or they expect to spend a ton of money going to Atlantis or going to Vegas or going to Atlanta to go cheer the team on. And, they're doing that and they're seeing Indiana get blown out by 25 at home to Illinois, or they're going and seeing Indiana getting blown out in the Bahamas, or they're going and seeing Indiana get blown out in Vegas or in New York or in Atlanta. It's really so people get frustrated by that, but then they're told, well, you shouldn't express your frustration because you should just sit there and be happy with whatever you've got. And you don't know what you're talking about anyway. And I do think that gets that really does leave fans in a no-win situation because everybody, it felt like that I talked to this offseason was like, I don't think this is going to work with Woodson, but we'll see. There were a lot of people that were less optimistic than that. They were like, he shouldn't have been back.
Right.
I don't know that you were ever going to get a scenario, given the particular situation at play with this role and the person involved and some of the other people involved. I don't think there was ever going to be a scenario where Woodson wasn't coaching this year at IU. But what's frustrating is that this was always a likely scenario,
right?
That it wasn't going to work out and that this was going to be where we were sitting halfway through January. And I am frustrated that it's been allowed to get to this point again, because, a subpar product keeps being put on the floor and there's no real reason for it other than a lack of understanding of the relationship that seems to exist between the fans and the program, and a lack of understanding about how you have to try to navigate that, and whoever the coach is has to navigate it. I mean, this is where, Archie Miller had a lot of flaws, and one of his biggest flaws, maybe the biggest flaw, was that he clearly didn't know how to communicate to the fan base. One of Tom Crean's biggest strengths at the beginning was he knew how to communicate to the fan base. And you can mark almost exactly the time when things turned. It was when Crean stopped communicating with the fan base. Now you can say, well, the fan base is not good to deal with, but I don't think that's true. Like most fans just want to hear, hey, there are flaws here. We've got to try to figure out a way to work on them. A
prime example of that is like the Pacers this year. They start like, I'm a Pacers fan. Like they started out slow. Halliburton wasn't looking good. And in all the post games, it wasn't like they were saying, man, fans just got to shut up or you just got to get used to it. Like they were all saying, and again, what are you going to say? But like Halliburton was saying, like, I got to figure this out. Like I got to figure out what's going on. Like I'm going to work on this. And now if they continue to struggle and he kept saying that at some point, it's like, all right, let's figure it out. But the Pacers have now won like 6 of 7. They played well. Like maybe the competition is slight, but like hearing that throughout the process, like, well, at least they're saying the right things. Like, and that's, that is part of professional, like at high level sports is it's like you got to say sometimes the right things. And a lot of times it's platitudes, but you have to say that. You can't just be like, hey, there's real Pacers fans. There's not Pacers fans. Like this is our process. This is the way we're going to do it. And if you think I'm playing bad, you're wrong. It's like that. You're creating animosity. It doesn't need to be there. And like the Pacers are a prime example. Now, couple wins. It's like everyone's like, great. He said he was going to figure it out. He's figuring it out.
Well, and there's another element with college basketball now. And look, I don't agree with fans when they say this, but I understand where they think they're coming from, which is, one of the big refrains I keep hearing is, well, guys are getting paid now. They don't care. They're not going to go out and put out effort. This is, you'll know when to disengage with an IU fan if that comes out of their mouth, if you hear that from anybody. Because I'll note, like, if you think Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, UConn, if you think those guys aren't getting paid, you're a moron. And if you don't understand that they're playing really hard, like, watch their games. Like, they play really hard. They play really well. They win a lot of games. It has nothing to do with the salaries involved.
Can I say two more things on that? Like,
yeah, go ahead.
I would also say if you think people weren't getting paid before NIL, you're a moron. Like, there were people getting paid who played hard. But I also, like, this is, I brought this up before. It always concerns me in that, there are, I'm not a fan of booing players at any level, but like there is kind of an agreement. Like, you're a professional athlete. You play for the Pacers. First off, you're guaranteed a salary that is normally higher than most NIL, but you get health insurance. Like, you're a professional. It's part of your job. I'm not saying it's right. I would never boo anybody, but I'm like, you want to boo a professional player, don't cross the line, but like, that's fine. My thing that I think does need to be always thought of is, sure, Ballo he's getting money. He's still like 23 years old. Like, he's still young. A lot of these kids are 19, 20, 21 years old. And like, yes, they are getting some money to play basketball, but like, they are by no means, it's not like, they don't have health insurance. It's not a job. They don't have a pension. And I'm just like, there's a dynamic here where we're treating them as if they are exactly like professional athletes, but they're not. Like, they are still in college. They're still they're still 20. I mean, you're still young and you're still learning things. I'm not saying 24 is any different in the NBA, but it's like you are now a professional. You've taken a different step to get there. It's always bothered me. And then the last thing I'll say, when people then it's like, so I'm going to put my anger and my vitriol toward the adult who's a professional, who's also getting paid and is, in his mid 60s, a coach. Why is that the wrong thing to do? Like, you want to yell at a 19-year-old? That's just, it's always bothered me, and it will always bother me. Like, you have to remember, these are college kids, and think about where you were in college, even if you were getting paid for a job or not.
No, I agree. And I get where I was going with my original statement there was not too different from where you ended up, which is that I don't think the team's been put in a position to succeed, and I think that lands squarely on the shoulders of the coach and the coaching staff. And I get frustrated when the discourse then trends towards, well, we're going to talk about players or lack of effort or whatever. I'm not absolving players. There's clearly some lack of effort issues, but it's ultimately the coach's job to get people up and running. And it's one thing. It's like if you inherit a team or if you under recruit, that's one thing. But this is a group of talented players.
Yeah.
Like, there's a bunch of coaches across the country who would love to have this particular roster and see what they
get this roster.
Right. And it is, and going back, I guess, to what you said earlier about decisions and, not making a decision is a decision. It just kind of feels like, again, Indiana's in a spot where they're not willing to make a change until the end of the year. And Woodson's not going to make a decision on his own. And I'm not saying either side is wrong in that, but it's just going to lead to a very ugly next 2 months, because I just don't see a lot of scenarios where it gets better. It's a tough conference. It's a team that has shown a ton of weaknesses. They can win any game, any one game on their schedule. They can win the rest of the way. They have that level of talent. If their shots are going in and if they're playing good defense, they can win any single game that they have left on their schedule. But that's not what basketball in the team sports setting is about. It's about winning enough games to make a tournament. It's about living up to expectations, as you said earlier. And the bar for this season was very high. And it wasn't just fans that were setting that. It was expectations that came from the coaching staff. It was expectations that came from media that covered the team. And it's very disappointing that it's where it's at. And given the personalities involved and the circumstances involved, it just feels like we're going to be involved in a car crash here for the next 2 months, because it feels like at this stage, I'm having a hard time envisioning a scenario where it ends any other way than that, because it would require something that is very unusual out of either party moving forward for that to change. And it's unfortunate because it's going to lead to a lot of negativity, a lot of toxicity. It's going to lead to Indiana looking bad as an institution. It's going to lead to fans looking bad. It's going to lead to the coaching staff looking bad. And it's going to lead to the players looking bad. No one wins in this scenario. And I'm frustrated that it's gotten to this point when it was very, very likely, and it was easy to predict that this was the point that it was going to get to.
And I just want to say ... again, because what's frustrating is we kind of went through it, but this is basically another March since you and I have graduated from college where I just want this to be over and I want to be moving. And we all kind of know what's going to happen. It's just we got to basically punt 2 months to get there. And what sucks is, so we're doing it this time. Archie's last year, we did it for less time, but there was still a period of a couple of weeks to a month where we did it. At the end of Crean's time, we're at 3. We did the exact same thing. The Dockett Sampson thing, it's a different situation, but it still happened. That was another period where it's all right, I want this to be over and I'm ready for the next page. That's 4. And then as you mentioned, Davis, that's 5. That's 5 years, 5 Marches. I remember growing up where March was awesome. March didn't always end in the Final Four, but at least it ended in us playing a game that I cared about, and we lost a game. It's oh, it sucks, man. We were a 10 seed. Well, what are you going to do? Do better next year. I never thought that 20% of my life after college would be spent just I cannot wait for it to be April to get the hell out of this situation. And we're now doing it 5 times. And that's the frustrating part. And there's different people involved. There's different minutes. And I'm not connecting any of the two. I'm just saying that's where I get really pissed. I do. I'm annoyed that I have to sit through this again, and we all kind of know we just need to get there. There's no solution, but just time. But dude, I'm 46. I'm going to be 50 in 4 years. I'm running out of time, bro. Well, I'm really running out of time. Just punt seasons away.
It goes back to something I think it was in the last podcast we did. I heard from a few people about it. It's why when you say, and the IU basketball should be in the Sweet 16 or competing for Big Ten titles. Again, this is Indiana basketball. This is what it's been allowed to devolve to. Okay, we are Minnesota.
At least they beat Michigan.
Well, right. It's
right.
there's the fact that again, if you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, I've made this statement before. This is nothing new, but again, Indiana made the wrong hire at head coach and has gotten themselves down a rabbit hole that they're going to only be able to dig out of by firing that coach and trying again with somebody else. And
the trouble is that could be applied to 3 different situations over the last 20 years. Yeah. It's I would be who are you talking? Which one are you talking about?
It's really it's 4. 5. It's 5. I mean, you can't make any argument that Davis or Sampson or Miller or Woodson was the right hire. You could maybe make a limited argument for Crean. Crean, I think, just his shelf life expired after about 5 or 6 years.
And in Sampson, you mean not the coaching, but the cultural fit.
Right. Well, again, like that situation, it's you're going to hire this coach. And at the time, there was nobody controlling anything at IU.
And you know that he's a loose cannon with rules.
Yeah. And so it's you got to commit to the bit if you're going to do that. Yeah. And just like with this, I mean, and
great point.
And I think for Indiana, for better or for worse, I always love how it's Indiana isn't supportive of coaches. Indiana doesn't support the coaches that they hire. It's Indiana throws their full faith and support and weight and finances behind every coach they hire. They've just done a bad job of hiring coaches.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, I remember somebody had asked you once, why didn't you hire a Signetti type before? It's this is, I was talking to somebody else about this, that, to me, I think this is you got to put the full effort behind a coach, but then you have to cut when it's wrong. And sometimes that seems early, but I go back to the Miller hire, Archie Miller and Chris Holtman. I will die on this hill. That year, those were the 2 best coaches in that offseason. They were. Go back and look. There was nobody else. And you could make a case maybe you should have gotten Adam Oates from Buffalo. That wasn't going to happen. At that point in time,
Nate Oates.
Sorry. Well, no, his brother is even better. At that point in time, it was Holtman and it was Miller. And you picked one. And, the thing is, why does, this is a question that's always vexed me is you look at Archie Miller, you look at Holtman, you look at Nate Oates at Buffalo. There's nothing that you could say well, no question 2 of those are going to fail. Like, if anything, Archie Miller had better success at Dayton than Oates did at Buffalo. Oates is doing really well. Miller isn't. Like, I don't know if we can answer why. I think the thing is you just have to identify it's not working. We're going to move on quick. And like, you have to do that. And you're not, maybe the next hire isn't, maybe you won't hit it again. Cause like, this is really tough to figure out who can make that next step and make it successfully. But to me, it's like, you've got to just quick decisions and move on. I think that's where we failed, is that we've let things linger. And now again, we're lingering again.
Not much else to say, so we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for joining us, folks, once again, as Crimson Cast rolls along. We'll be talking again. We might have something this weekend for you. We'll see, as Indiana takes on Ohio State on the road this evening. For Scott, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. Thanks for joining us, as always. We'll pod through this together, I promise. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. Bring back the Bison. So long, everybody.